Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Sarah Audsley, and I'm the Writing Across Media Facilitator at Vermont Studio Center. Thanks for being here tonight for our writer-to-writer reading with Tiana Nobile and Tamiko Beyer. All right, a bit about our readers tonight. Tiana Nobile is the author of Cleave, Hub City Press, 2021. She is a Korean-American adoptee, Kundiman Fellow, and a recipient of a Rona Jaffe Foundation Writers Award. She's a finalist for the National Poetry Series and Kundiman Poetry Prize. Her writing has appeared in Poetry Northwest, The New Republic, Guernica, and the Texas Review, among others. She lives in New Orleans, Louisiana, and I'm so pleased to have her here tonight with us because we also shared an MFA program experience at Warren Wilson College. And I've been a big, huge fan of Tiana's work for a very long time. And so I'm so pleased to be hosting her tonight. And a bit about our second reader, Tamiko. Tamiko Beyer is the author of the forthcoming, the currently published, out right now, poetry collection, Last Days, and We Come Elemental, both from Alice James Books. Her poetry and articles have been published or are forthcoming from Denver Quarterly, at Idaho Review, Doozy, Black Warrior Review, Georgia Review, Lit Hub, The Rumpus, and others. She publishes Starlight and Strategy, a monthly newsletter for a living life wide awake and shaping change, and lives on Massachusetts, Wampanoag, and Pawtucket land. And I'm also so pleased to host Tamiko tonight because we were in a writing group last year, and I've really enjoyed the exchanges and the comments. And I'm so thrilled to have both readers here tonight and to be in community together with you all. So thanks for joining us. And I'm going to turn it over to Tiana now. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah. Good evening, everybody. I am so happy to be here, like Sarah mentioned, with Sarah and Tamiko for this conversation tonight. So I'm zooming in from New Orleans, also known as Bilbancha, which is the unceded ancestral land of the Choctaw, Natchez, Chitimacha, and Homa people. I want to acknowledge and honor the first people who inhabited this land, especially in this moment when, as we speak, a horrific situation of ethnic cleansing is being reduced to a real estate dispute in Palestine. Land and who it belongs to and what we call it are meaningful, and I stand in solidarity with Palestinians who continue to suffer under Israeli occupation. That being said, I thought to start the reading, I'll read a poem by a friend and Palestinian American poet, Tariq Luthoun, who Sarah and I also got our MFAs together with at Warren Wilson. This poem appears in his chapbook, How the Water Holds Me, which was published by Bull City Press last year. We already know this. There is more to us than what was taken from us. A place to call home, land of olive trees and their branches, Palestine. There, I've said it. I want to be sure everyone knows where my parents hail from. Each of us needs a place to return to, genocide. I would hope everyone knows did not start and did not end at the Holocaust. I haven't forgotten that everyone needs a place on this planet. And I prefer to live where I can leave the doors unlocked, or live without the doors, or hell. I don't even care for walls, but I do care for the blues. Water, the sadness that comes when it is not within sight. I don't know if there is a child anywhere on this earth that wasn't at least once held by their mother. Water, where my mother held me until I was given to land. Oh, firm land, how my father holds me. People keep calling for blood, to dress you in it. I don't think any of them know truly how much of it the body can take, how much the body can lose. So that's by Tariq, How the Water Holds Me. So I just finished Tamiko's brilliant book, and I loved finding sweet connections between our work. So I thought I'd start with a poem that I think feels in kinship with Tamiko's First, because it mentions a bird, and secondly, because it's about survival and resilience in the face of oppression and erasure. It's called Migrant. Of an animal, especially a bird, a wandering species whom no seas nor places limit, a seed who survives despite the depths of hard winter, the ripple of a herring steering her band from icy seas to warmer strands. To find the usual watering places, despite the gauze of death that shrouds our eyes, is a breathtaking feat. Do you ever wonder why we felt like happy birds brushing our feathers on the tips of leaves? How we lifted our toes from one sandbank and landed, fingertips first, on another? Why we clutched the dumb and tiny creatures of flower and blade and sod between our budding fists? From an origin of buried seeds emerge these many-banded dagger wings. We of the sky, the dirt, and the sea, we the 7-league booters and the little by littlers, we transmigrated souls will prevail. We will carry ourselves into the realms of light. So I was born in South Korea and adopted when I was 6 months old, and in many ways never considered myself an immigrant because of anti-immigrant fear and sentiment that surrounded me in the white suburban Catholic community where I grew up. As an adult and through writing this book, I've finally been able to recognize that while my immigrant story isn't the most typical, I can still proudly identify as an immigrant and consider myself part of the complex web of immigrant stories. So in my poems, I often integrate language for different documents. And this next poem uses a document that my parents received from Korea as an update of my developmental status while they waited for me. And I was struck by how clinical most of the language of the document was. So in this poem, I ship between the actual text in the document and my own inserted language. And I'm actually going to share my screen. So give me 1 second. Oh, wait. Sorry. Hold on. I forgot it. I have to publish it to the web. Okay, this should work now. Y'all can see that? Yeah, okay. Child's pre-flight report. Name in full, Moon Young-shin. Date of birth, October 22nd, 1987. Name of escort, unknown. Case number 87C-2411. Date of departure, April 2nd, 1988. Destination, unknown. Feeding/eating. She cries with hunger, but knows the bottle. Sleeping habit. When lying on her side, she wraps her arms around her body. She wakes easily to rustling leaves, rain thrumming on roof tiles, and morning birds greeting the dawn. Toilet training. She moves bowels in good form once to twice a day. Speaking ability. She will learn quickly when to bite her tongue. For years, she will hold it tightly, teeth clenched. In her mouth, the bitter taste of a broken bloodline. Developmental condition. She tends to play well, even alone, but cries if it's boring. Placed on stomach, she lifts her head about 90 degrees, but gets irritated when it's beyond her ability. Physical condition. 6.6 kilograms, 60 centimeters at 5 months. Her skin is strong, but prone to scarring. Character. She is rather composed and mild. Legal status. So you might have seen on the document, it literally says legal status and then it's blank. And I found out later when I started to really explore a lot of these documents and do some research that children that are born in Korea but then relinquished at birth or soon thereafter, orphans, are not considered citizens. So once, especially once I was up for adoption, then I arrived in the United States, I went through a naturalization process and became a citizen, an American citizen, I think when I was like 3 or 4 years old. But as a result, there's this like weird kind of limbo period between my birth and being naturalized, that I was just a citizen of nowhere. And like I think about like what happens if that process had been denied or anything, like, you know, and there are stories of Korean adoptees that have been deported because their parents never completed the citizenship process, and then they go back to Korea and they're not a citizen of there either. It's just, there's just the levels of erasure, particularly for adoptees, are run pretty deep. So I want to read another poem that I felt in kinship with Tamiko's poetry. I've been an elementary school teacher for 11 years, and one science unit that I've taught many times is the life cycle of rocks. So this poem was inspired by a 3rd grade unit on rocks. Abstract. Igneous rocks are formed by fire. Conceived in the belly of a volcano, lava drips down its side and deposits at the base. As a result of cooler temperatures, the magma grows viscous on the Earth's surface and undergoes a process of solidification. Basalt, granite, obsidian. Broken down by weathering and erosion, the rock will become sediment, loose bits of matter, the dregs. Later, these same pieces will accumulate and lithify to form sedimentary rocks, conglomerate, limestone, sandstone. Over time, this same rock will succumb to pressure and sink back down inside the earth to be heated and melted, metamorphosized, gneiss, marble, quartzite. Once deep enough in the earth's mantle, the metamorphic rock will liquefy and return to the magma chamber. Or will the rock evade erosion, unwilling to be weathered? Will the rock rise up again instead of returning to its magma pillow? Or will the rock crumble into tiny particles of sand and pass its time in a shoal on the bottom of the ocean? My body a stone, weathered, compacted, compressed, softened by another body's tender heat, a hardened face wont to wince. If I jump from a cliff, will the canyon catch me? Or will I tumble, endlessly moving, endlessly seeking a place to rest my head? So I'm going to read a couple of poems that are part of kind of a longer thread throughout the book. Several of the poems in Cleave are in conversation with the social psychologist Harry Harlow, who is famous for his studies on attachment and relationships between caregivers and infants. He did this work primarily with rhesus monkeys, most famously taking them away from their mothers and presenting them with 2 surrogate mothers, one of cloth and one of wire, in order to study the impact of contact comfort and nurturing on the monkey's psychological development. And as you might imagine, the monkeys with cloth mothers developed at a more typical, well-adjusted rate than the ones with wire mothers, who were very socially anxious and often withdrawn. So I'll read 2 poems that explore 2 sides of the same mother using Harlow's idea as a springboard. Mother of Cloth. During hurricanes, my body tucked tightly under blankets and eyes illuminated by the pale luster of a plastic nightlight, you drew curly cues along my spine with your index finger, patted my back to the beat of rain pounding on the window. When there's a storm, it means they're bowling in heaven. Claps of thunder are balls tossed down the lane. Each flash of lightning means an angel just got a strike. We would count the seconds between thunder, 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3. And I'd shudder in my sheets, hands clasped in prayer, begging God to hurry up and end the party. You wrapped my body in cloth, held my hand until you felt the fingers loosen and fall. The next time I woke, I called your name and you would come. You always came. Mother of wire. If I had a choice, mother of wire, barbed and wombless, my mouth poised to pucker. I tried my best given the tools I had, you say. Where were you while I crouched in the corner, a nest of shadows? Bring out the hammer, mother. The statue of the Virgin Mary illuminates my nightstand. I touch, 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 kiss her foot, soaked in snake's blood, splattered spots of red acrylic. In the dictionary of childhood illnesses, I seek symptoms that fit my unraveling. Hair falling in clumps on the couch, tiny meticulous hands counting each strand. Call me Rhesus, young and moonless, monkey without a cloth to dust her bones. I'm gonna read 2 more. So at first, when I discovered Harlow, I found his ideas on attachment theory to be super insightful and how they help me understand how separation and abandonment impacts the psychological development of, of adoptees. But then the deeper I got into his story, the more I learned how problematic and abusive his practices became over time and how that mirrored his own psychological unraveling. I think it's also really interesting to note that this man who spent his life work researching early childhood development was also an absent and alcoholic father. So this next poem was the first one I wrote to engage in a more direct dialogue with Harlow himself. Now, so it has a funky shape. Interview with Dr. Harlow. What do you taste in the morning when you lick your lips? Are they soft or split, cracked by the Wisconsin wind? Do you cover your mouth when you cough? With your elbow or your hand? When the germs are floating through the air, do you imagine where they land? How those minuscule microbes descend with invisible parachutes? The power of gravity on weightless spit? Do you smirk in your colleague's coffee mug? How do you make sense out of loneliness? At night, beneath the buzz of fluorescent light, do you unlatch the lock? Do you count their inhalations as they speak? Do you taste their morning breath? The little bacteria floating in the air and landing on the tip of your tongue? If it lands on your tongue, do you swallow it? Can you tell me what it tastes like? Do you feel the microbes twist as they sink down your esophagus? How does it feel to watch them hold each other's hands, their woolly knuckles braided, the touch of their palms? What do you do when the lock has been left open? What do you do when they reach through the cage? What do you do when they stare at you straight in your eyes and cough in your open mouth? It's interesting, a friend recently told me that when she saw this poem, she thought it was in the shape of a tongue. And when I thought that was so cool, because I guess when I look at the poem, I often thought of it as like a pickaxe or an arrowhead to kind of like shatter the pedestal of this scientist man. So this is gonna be my last poem. I think, like I said, as I learned more about Harlow and how his practices just became more and more problematic throughout the course of his career, I began to really hold him in a more critical light. And this poem kind of came out of this envisioning of a kind of revolutionary moment where the monkey, as a metaphor for the adoptee, is liberated and gains autonomy beyond the confines of the laboratory. So I'm also going to share my screen again. And I'm going to read this poem with this video, which is actual footage from Harlow's lab playing in the background.
Conquest. The search for new knowledge about our universe, our world, and ourselves.
Harlow's monkey. We learned to give ourselves away early on. We used to hide the bruises, used to scratch our arms until they bled, until our body was a weeping wound. The cage exists only in our mind. Kick down the door, matchstick. Whether of wire or terry cloth, we all burn the same. We gasp for air and taste the bitter juice of roses, petals dried and clipped to the pages of our chest. At the feet of our gods, we pile our bones, muscles threaded to flesh. The fresh liquor of unchained thought burning the roof of our mouths, we take back our tongues, drink handfuls of water. In what shallow grave will we bury the words we killed? Amani, Abaji, Dejan, Moon Young Shin. We deliver them to the dirt mother and her family of worms. The past mushrooms and burns in atomic flesh. We sling a new sun from the pit of our stomachs and raise our woolly hands, fingers clenched. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tiana.
Thank you, Tiana. That was so beautiful and powerful. And yeah, wow. It's really incredible to hear you read the poems. I love hearing them in your voice. So thank you so much, Sarah, for the invitation to be here tonight and be in conversation with Tiana. I am really grateful to actually both of you for having read and given me feedback on some of the poems that actually made their way into my book tonight. And Tiana, I love that you read Migrant and Abstract when I was reading your book. Those were the two that really jumped out at me, and I'm like, oh, we're in conversation together. So, so that's really fun, and I think I'm also going to be reading some poems that I think are in conversation with, particularly those two poems. Yeah, so I wrote Last Days as a poetic practice of radical imagination for our current political and environmental crises. And it explores how we might transform the conditions that we find ourselves in to usher in a future that's more beautiful, more just, and more loving than we can even imagine. So I was really thrilled to have artwork by the artist Just Snow, who's also a Kundiman fellow. And it's from a mural that they painted in Philadelphia, and I feel like it really captures the essence of what I hope this book communicates. And so I'm going to actually start with a poem called Equinox. And I moved from Tokyo, Japan to the US when I was 12. I was born here, but then my family, we all moved to Japan and stayed there for 10 years. And I feel like I've spent my lifetime trying to learn what it means to inhabit this particular body in this particular time. And this poem attempts to reflect some of that investigation. So, Equinox. The girl stands on the edge of the only country she has ever known. Blue-tiled roofs, the train track heartbeat. The girl boards a jet plane, and when she lands, the wide streets of the new country wash upon her like waves, depositing flotsam at her feet. Broken color TV, paper crown, pacifier. Her name bleeds into the other alphabet. At exactly the midpoint, she dissolves. Dear ghost girl, tell me again the stroke order. I used to know your form by heart. Small figure tucked in a cul-de-sac driveway. 30 years later, I lose our syllables, our age, race, and gender. We are in the back seat of a station wagon. We are crossing the avenues. We are walking at the base of skyscrapers. We make sounds with our mouths. We smell the burning brakes of subway cars. We lean into the sun. Our arms swing perpendicular pendulums, time and space keepers. Sun on a fulcrum, the light changes direction. Say only your name. Woman at the edge of a country she has only started to learn. I look down at the thin cracks in the concrete and the seedlings breaking through. I bend my knees, place my hands next to the green shoots. This, my arms and legs, my mixed race, my crackling heart. This, the dirt and glitter of my gender. This, the language I am stitched into. So the book itself gets its title from a prose poetry sequence in the middle of the book, which is called Last Days. And the sequence follows a small group of revolutionaries who are set on taking down the corporate empire. And as they do this, the central character comes to understand her own power and trust her intuition. And so it's like prose poems with some more lineated poems interspersed throughout. And those are called Ancestor Chorus. And I'm really thinking of them as like messages from the ancestors. But then there are also quotes woven in throughout from like literary and political ancestors, including Audre Lorde, Sun Tzu, Homi Bhabha, Claudia Rankine, and Kate Greenstreet. So that it's like really like following my some of my lineages of thought and writing. So I'm going to read the first two sections from the sequence. Last Days. 1. Safe is an interpretation. Kate Greenstreet. We didn't expect the eagerness that filled us on the last days of empire. For what, we couldn't exactly say. Metal glistened on the streets in the hot September days. The sun no longer a dandelion, the sun most definitely a muzzle. When it set, the corporation, keen to kill the dark, flipped the switch. Then the marble facades of buildings were suddenly uplit, streetlights swirled incandescent, and thousands of people hurtled through the furnace of synthesized laughter, pop songs, and an unlimited desire for all. Some of us were on the edges, blocking out the canned sounds and lights as best we could, building something new, something old. We could feel the northern half of our planet begin to tilt away from the sun. I am on the cusp of change and the curve is shifting fast. It was an experience and then it was a memory and then a system of belief, a way to navigate the dissolving world. I wanted to become more salt wind, less reflection, to become quiet enough to hear the ancestors. Ancestor Chorus. Find the source at the underwater roots, at the mud line, fragile strands of a new language, among cattails and seed casings. Trust the fibers will lean in the right direction, will not mislead you. Child, we have always laid one strand over, then under the next, over and under, until something like true meaning emerges from the twist of our fingers. This basket is for you, an exhortation, a map. Soon you will need to reach all of us in this river of time with the truest sentences you can weave. There were 5 of us in that small apartment, hauling water, coding and decoding, soldering metal, constructing strategies, drafting poems. I lifted heavy objects and learned to stitch up an open wound. I no longer thought of myself as a girl. I was often afraid. At the same time, I glistened in the everyday fever brought on by waves' eyes opening, the morning sky breaking. When we met, Wave said holding on was dangerous. The taste of hope could make us reckless. I knew what she meant, but despite ourselves, I came to love how she tasted more than I loved any fruit on my tongue. Ancestor chorus. Light breaks the glass, separating you from the present. The dangerous words chime in the wind, spike into sand and grass. Behold the other kind of blade, power of seed, turn blossom, turn fruit. In the afternoons, we would cross the river on the train, skimming ancient tracks into the center of the city where things are bought and sold on a grand scale. We slid into the gaps of commerce, knowing all warfare is based on deception. So many people were building scaffolding against crumbling structures, using incantations from their fathers as mortar. But some attempted to excavate the signals very deep within their bodies. Some tried to listen to their heartbeats. Those were the ones we were looking for. We slipped them a scrap of paper, then dissolved back into the crowd. Ancestor chorus. Words can obscure like clouds or reveal like the tidal pull. Do you remember rain? The state of emergency is also always the state of emergence. Where does the water go when ocean draws out its lowest tide? When the new recruits followed the poem to find us, we put them to work or gave them maps to others in need of their skills. We were hundreds of loose groups across the country, fashioning transformation out of starlight and strategy, spindrift and solidarity. I was impatient for the waking, the sharp sensation of light and promise. I thought I understood. But there was still so much to learn. Wave reminded me of the libraries they had shut down years ago, their floors like silk, books heavy with promise. That's where we went, picking the locks, scraping away the dust, memorizing what we could. Power grids, water, sewer lines, and fiber optic cables snaked their way across the city. We became deft in mapping and coordinates, diversions and distraction. We discovered the pattern the corporation relied on, found the back doors, planted the traps with care. Creating new economies in the heart of capital required cunning and poetic imagination. We knew we were being watched when nice drones paused above our fire escape. But cooking and dancing were not yet crimes. We could plan just as well stirring the pot in 3/4 time as in stillness around the kitchen table. Patience is in the living. Time opens out to you. We hummed and we sang. We simmered soup and kneaded flour and water. We mapped out the next tactics. 2. The body with its arms up is a kind of miracle. Araceli Gourmet. We knew it would change and it did. Mostly we were prepared for it, but the cold policing still struck us hard. We got the warning just in time from Ro down at the bodega. The cops were sawing at the heavy chain across the door downstairs. I strapped the typewriter to my back and Wave gathered up her colored notebooks as the cops' boots thundered up the stairwell. The kitchen window jammed. Wave heaved her shoulder under the sash and it budged a few more inches. Tara and May slid out, scaled down the fire escape. Wave followed, but when I tried, the typewriter got wedged and I couldn't move. The corporate police battered their rifle butts at the door. We had reinforced with steel months ago. Wave put her arms around my ribs and pulled. I toppled out, our arms tight around each other. We shimmied down the rope and traveled fast out of the city's most rumbling sections. Tara and May went south across the harbor. Rose stayed to break the code. Wave and I ran tight together, broadcasting alarm signals over encrypted channels. We spoke the words, leaning into dangerous conversations. We knew there was at least one spy among us, but we had to take the risk. Ancestor chorus. Say a name and see its familiar float by. The present was a sheet of glass suspended in midair. We loosened our fists, wiped down the sweat, then gripped again. We became intimately familiar with our weapons and the soles of our feet, with ghost as a verb. We walked north, mostly on frontage roads. Even though we had been preparing all this time, we thought somehow it might turn out differently. But we were queers and people of color. We grew up learning how to read the signs on white people's faces, on the hands of cops, and in the sound of breaking glass. We knew it was long past time. Ancestor chorus. And then the fall, the syntax strange days. Translate tree roots, terror. The code will be full of false starts, trap doors, dead ends. Where your shadow rises, keep your ear to the sky. Make meaning from the ground up, the only way to pray. It's really funny, the last couple readings, when I've been reading this this poem, there's been sirens like coming through. So I guess that says something. So I'm going to read this poem that I think is in conversation with abstract. And I wrote this poem for a friend of mine when we were pretty young, in our early 20s. She got pregnant and decided to have the baby and asked me to be the poet, the baby's birth poet. So I wrote a poem when he was born, and then I wrote a poem every year. And we didn't really say how long I would do it for, and I just kept doing it every year until he turned 18, and now he's like in college, which is pretty awesome. So this is a poem I wrote for him, I don't know, sometime in his early teens, I think. Solstice. I pick up a small stone, honeycombed, rust-colored, lighter than I expect, like driftwood or ember, a bit of pumice in my palm. Rocks don't lie. What gets buried deep eventually touches fire. And when with enough heat, even the hardest stone melts, then rises to surface sky. No fixed form on this earth. We are so much more than our genetic code. How much pressure will we endure before we burst out of our bodies, rain down like burning rock? The longest day brings the dark. When the ground rumbles, I turn my shoulders to the mountains, open my mouth, eat the midday sun. I'm going to read two more poems. This is a poem called Generations, and so it tracks the generations, or at least one thread of generations of Japanese Americans in the US, and the way each section is named for kind of how we name these generations. So the first and second generations, the Issei and Nisei, were the ones who were imprisoned during World War II. And they were my great-grandparents and grandparents' generations. My mom grew up in Hawaii, and so no one in my bloodline was imprisoned, although I have uncles through marriage who were. So and then my parents' generation, the boomers, are Sansei, and I'm Yonsei, fourth generation. So generations. Issei. Plant a stone, generation. Have faith even the sandiest soil will bloom something, generation. Sore ne, ima, only cactus. But even then, cut away spike, slice. water to quench our raging, body made for long days, hard work. Shitakaganai. If a barrack we are living, we must bend our minds to a pot full of rice, river full of flashing fish. Nise. What happened to our tongue generation? The nail that sticks up gets pounded down generation. We go when army says go, take only what we can carry, shame the heaviest suitcase. To lift our feet, tack shame up between doorways, lacquer over eyes, feed shame with cream of wheat to the babies, then pace silence over rage. Sansei. Power to the people generation. Yellow peril supports black power generation. Why aren't we talking about this generation? Harvesting the hard knots, radish or rage, no matter, dirt still clings to the roots. We yell into shame, raise our fists. We build monuments in the desert, rescue scraps of culture, shake out creases from musty kimono. Later, some open our fists, wanting more generation. Yonsei. When the floodwaters receded, there we were, you get what you asked for generation, trying to find the pieces as best we could. But everything was slightly askew, roofs settling into odd angles, bicycle tires on hatchback rims, cherries smelling like oranges. Even our faces didn't match, one brown eye, one black, hands too big, tongues looping out of our split mouths. We named it beautiful, this broken world we inherited. And we hammered each piece somewhere new, sowing a field full of nails. And I'm actually going to end with a poem by a mentor, teacher, friend of mine, Suhair Hamad, who's a Palestinian American poet. So Tiana, I feel like we're like totally on the same page. I've been thinking since, for the last couple of weeks, I've been mourning and outraged, and I've been thinking about how I really came of political age during the second Intifada. I was living in San Francisco and really becoming politicized in all ways, including around the issue of Palestine. Some of the first protests and rallies I went to was in support of a free Palestine. And I don't know, I feel a lot of things right now, including deep rage and horror. But I also have a feeling that maybe this time things will change. I don't know how or how long it's going to take, but I was actually I joined Clubhouse. I don't really know what I'm doing there, but there's been this room for the last 3 days where it's just Israelis and Palestinians talking to each other. And I was listening in for a little bit this afternoon, and I don't know that there's ever been anything quite like that, where people can just talk to each other. And I think with social media, really being able to show what's happening in Palestine, I feel like maybe something can change. And I feel like it's part of this global uprising, part of a massive shift towards justice. And that's really kind of what I'm exploring in Last Days. I do think this is the last days of empire, and it's my work to get in alignment with my values. And I think it's all of our work to do that, to envision a future that we want for everyone. So anyway, I wanted to finish with this poem from Suhair Hamad. It's from her book, Breaking Poems. And I don't know if you can buy it anymore, but it's awesome. Breaking Poems. This is, all of the poems are called Break, and then they have a little subtitle. So this is Break. Memories don't live like people do. Ramallah, rooster outside, hot rock, hard times, threw up too much everything beautiful, occupied terra, amped, wired, bound, hawk spread, regal bearing, Taj exploding, cinnamon sticks, wa, fire, next translocation, Transjordan borders, passes, wa, ports, transliterated, Arabic, illiterate, scripted, heavy, crested, embroidered, stitched, steady, tested. Don't tell me you don't know this lonely. Gather, brother, misting husband, remember father, birth dreaming, preset, rewind, pre-crime. Was there ever there a peace? Was Habibi ever here? Were my people ever free? Was there a way out of this? Forever was a mustard seed, my faith. Yellow canary in a gold skirt, shift mind. It was always a regular day, a normal day, a ordinary day when I stopped to think clear, a sky before. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And the synchronicities and I think I was like, when the sirens were going off when you were reading that poem, I was like, is she playing audio in the background? Like, and I was like, oh no, it's actually happening outside her window. And thank you, Tiana, for opening with Tarek's poem, and thank you for closing with that poem you just read, Tamiko. We have a few more minutes left, and I'd love to open it up to any questions. You can drop them into the chat. And I selfishly want to ask this question. Well, actually, it's maybe a multi question. I'm interested in how both of you are able to write in first person plural, in the we, like writing from the point of view of we and from a collective voice. I'm wondering how you go about drafting or thinking about those in your process. Yeah, I'll just ask that question to start.
I guess I can speak to that briefly. I think most of my poems in a first draft is just like, it's just a splurge of words, and it's often first person. It's often like a prose block of text, and it's through revision that it ultimately takes its form. And I think for me, like, poems go through many various iterations, and I'll explore, or I'll play with perspective for sure. I think one poem I have in the book, I think I was a supervisor in my MFA was like, why don't you try it in second person? And it just completely like blew the poem wide open from first to second. And I think in particular with the Harlow poems, switching from first to first person singular to first person plural, I think I felt more of like a part of a dialogue, a larger dialogue, or positioning it within this like greater system that has like historically, whether it be oppressing like laboratory animals or the adoption industrial complex, like how can we as a collective voice, whether of adoptees or monkeys, finally like take back some power. And I think it gets tricky because then there's like, I don't want to speak for anybody, or say like I'm representing this entire group of people, but I think it's like more, especially maybe with monkeys, I felt more at liberty. I don't know. Yeah, what do you think, Tamiko?
Yeah, I think it's a complicated and tricky thing to try to do. In my first book, We Come Elemental, I almost exclusively used the we, and I didn't really have a very clear analysis around it. It just felt like I I mean, it was like a lot of kind of channeling water energy as I was writing that. So like a lot of the, I was thinking about this concept of like disappearing, and with climate change and all of the species that are disappearing. And so I was trying to like channel that. So again, like non-human, but the lines were blurry. And so when I was working on Last Days, I really wanted to be a lot more like deliberate about when I used we and when I used the first person singular. And I ended up like having these poems come through that were about a group of humans who merged with birds. And like it was in that context where we felt like, yeah, this is like this fantastical, speculative world. And like what does it take for humanity? What will it take for humanity to like change and survive and make sure that as many other species survive as possible? So yeah, and then like what the Last Day sequence, it's like a lot of it is just like the band of revolutionaries. So I guess in writing things that were more like fictional, I felt like it made sense to write in the we. And I feel like I feel much more vulnerable when I write in the first person singular. And actually Zvi's on this call. When he read my manuscript, he was like, I think you need to be more vulnerable and not know as much in your poems. And I was like, yeah, it's true. So that was part of it too, is like moving poems moving from the we to the I to be a little bit more vulnerable. I feel like I might spend the rest of my life like figuring out my relationship to we, and not speaking for others, but also like acknowledging the collective experience of what it means to be human in this moment, which is like what I'm obsessed about right now.
Thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
Question? Okay, I really loved the poem, and I posted it on Instagram yesterday. We are bodies, and bodies, we are stars. And I think also because I've been thinking so much about Palestine, and I just read so much into it around just like collective liberation and solidarity in the struggle. And then I also just felt like throughout the book, echoes of Adrienne Marie Brown were just like calling to me. So I just wonder about, I guess my question is, how does your experience as an organizer and an activist inform your poetics? And I the thing that came to me is like this idea of like poetics of solidarity, and it like, if you like, what does that mean to you? It's something that reading your book I just like thought of, and I guess I wonder what you think of it.
That's such a great question. And I forgot, in answering that previous question, I forgot about that poem of We Are Bodies Within Bodies, where I was really trying to like write into a we that was really, that like encompassed a lot of different experiences. But to your question of like, what do I think about the poetics of solidarity? I mean, I feel like that's really like, for me, like what I think that I'm supposed to be doing with my work right now is to help us all imagine a future that's different from the one that we seem to be headed towards, kind of at breakneck speed. And like as a storyteller and as a world creator, like I think part of the work, there's like organizing that needs to be done, hitting the streets, doing the social media, lobbying politicians, all of that. But then also there needs to be people who can hold a vision of like what's possible beyond like what society tells us is possible. And so I really feel like that's the work that I'm really drawn to. And I guess it is like a poetics of solidarity. I love that term. I'm wondering if you would categorize your work as that, you know, in thinking about like being part of this group of international, like transnationally adoptees.
Yeah, I think I definitely would categorize my work as political. I think a lot about the politics of the adoption industry and like how to situate my story within like neo-colonial kind of framework. Um, though I would think that I would say that your work, especially there's the poem where you like where you mentioned like George Floyd and Sandra Bland. I feel like you're speaking really specifically to, like you said, to this moment, and it felt like, you know, speaking, elevating these stories, but there's also, I felt like this underlying kind of sense of hope, right, for like a brighter future where we're all surviving and thriving. And I guess I think that's something like and that's thinking of Adrienne Maree Brown. I feel like there's such exuberant optimism with her work, and I don't know if I'm there. And I like the idea of striving to that in my poetry and just in my like understanding. But I like that's what I really appreciated about your book, and I think and I think I'm still working through like what does it mean, what does a poetics of solidarity mean, and like where could I fit in that. But I definitely felt inspired by where you're going with this book.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's how I read Cleave, you know, as like placing your particular experience within this larger political experience. And also like being so, like going so deeply into like the delving of like what, just like the very personal experiences of, you know, what it means to be transracially adopted. And I feel like that is also like such a important part of like creating the future that we want, is like we actually have to be like do the work internally too. And so I'm curious, I know we're almost out of time, but like this question of vulnerability and like going into like really deep and hard feelings through poetry, like I'm just wondering like what your experience of that is and how you think about it.
Yeah, definitely. I feel I think that's part, like the Harlow stuff, I started there. And I think in lots of ways because I wasn't quite ready to get into the muck of like all like very complex personal feelings and like, yeah, I think like I was reading the Harlow stuff while simultaneously working through my own adoption archive. But I think it took me a minute to be able to like figure out how I was going to integrate that into the work. But I think that the Harlow stuff like did create an opening for me to, and also like deepen my understanding about the like kind of, you know, just like psychological development, like, you know, what is going on in my mind and my body. And I think like that and like lots of therapy, like starting to have language to associate with that gave me space to finally go there. But it took a lot of like kind of like skirting around it before I like finally felt brave enough, I guess.
They're so gorgeous, the poems. I mean, the whole book, but yeah, I'm really glad that it is interesting how how like coming at things kind of sideways can land us to where we need to go.
It was also, and I don't know about you, Sarah, like but it was so cool because some of these poems, like we read early drafts of in our revision group. So like reading them in the re-encountering them in the book, and then hearing you read, like Generations was, I remember reading that. Yeah, I don't know if it was just a couple of times, and it was just so cool to be a part of that process behind the scenes.
Yeah, it's really lovely to have your work be read side by side and to be able to see how and in what ways you're in conversation with each other, and how the poems how different bodies of work come from different bodies, literally different bodies with different minds and hearts and feelings and experiences. But in that way, like there is something that connects, and that they're in conversation together is something that was really, I thought it was going to be good, but I didn't know it was going to be this good. Yeah, it's wonderful to see the revisions that you've made, Tamiko, to these poems and how they appear now in your collection. And I love your vision. And I was, my last question, sorry to keep you, my last question is, in what ways do both of you invite in the imagination into your work? And I think Tamiko, like you're living in that like fictionalized world, but I think that Tiana, you do that too, like you tap into like levels of, you're creating your own lexicon. So I was just wondering if you wanted to speak about the use of the poetic imagination in your work, and as my last final question.
I know we're running out of time, but also with that, Tamiko, I wanted, like, if you could tie in also talking about like hybridity and like how I wondered about like, were you writing the poems alongside that speculative piece, and like how did you feel like they were in, or was it like one after the other, and like how were they like kind of interacting with each other?
Well, I guess really quickly, I wrote Last Days like 7 years ago or something. This book like took like 10 years to write, but I wrote those first, and then I thought I was going to write another whole sequence of like these bird human poems, and it ended up just, that's actually not what ended up needed to happen. I was thinking that it would be like one book with two kind of sequences. But I do think that writing Last Days kind of like the bird people poems were informed by it. And to your question, Sarah, I really do feel like I'm like I write best when I open myself up to whatever wants to be communicated through me. And so I think that's really how I think about the poetic imagination. Is also, my first drafts are just like free flowing, messes of words on the page. And I don't try to like stop and think about it too much until I start the revision. But yeah, that's kind of what I think about it.
Yeah, I think for me, and particularly as an adoptee, right, there's just like so much unknown or just mystery when it comes to origin and ancestry. And growing up, I definitely like, so I didn't think about it, or I like neglected it, or I saw it as kind of like as a barrier for me to like have any kind of understanding or deeper connection with that origin. Whereas once I started really actively writing the poems in the book, I started to something shifted in my thinking, or I was like, okay, instead of thinking about this as a barrier or an obstacle, how can I fill it with something different and something that's entirely my own, and like just envision, create my own like mythological origin story, or like create my own like mythological mother figures. And from there, once I was like gave myself permission to do that, really I could do whatever I wanted. and I think part of that too, what was exciting ultimately was like to actually like hold these people accountable and hold these systems accountable through my imagination.
Thank you so much for indulging my last question. Yeah, I mean, the blank page is where we can roam and be as free as we want to be. And thank you for showing that to us tonight, and for sharing your beautiful poems, and for being in community together. It means so much to me personally. And also, I thank you on behalf of Vermont Studio Center. And thank you everyone for joining tonight, and for being together, and sharing in beautiful poems and work that pushes and asks us to think about things differently, and what we can do to change the systems. Thank you so much, Tiana. Thank you, Tamiko. And be well, be safe, and take good care of yourselves.